Knowledge of medical practice consists in an understanding of the ultimate conditions, causes, or etiology that produces the observed illnesses, which may be remedied by prescribed treatments. Diagnosis traces the observed effects of illness back to its necessary cause, which treatment opposes, cancels, and harmonizes to restore the bodily health. Many diagnoses have many practical treatments, yet all of these specific practices are united within the general theory of the nature of the body, the causes of illness, and the prescriptions for health. The general theory of medicine cannot be directly observed as a simple physical organ, pathology, or treatment practice. No single recipe encompasses the entire art. Rather, the theory of medicine may only be contemplated as an idea that is theoretically prior to the diagnostic application and remedial prescriptions. Like physical organisms, ideas are born from parents and grow to maturity to sire new ideas in a dynamic ecology of thought. Theory of medicine, like the diagnosis and treatment, has its own history, etiology, and conditions that may be speculatively reconstructed according to its fundamental doctrines. Knowledge of general theory of medicine consists of understanding the ultimate conditions of these fundamental doctrines. The basic doctrines of traditional Chinese medicine are yin-yang theory, wuxing, five-element theory, and the correlation of qi vital forces within the body and throughout the cosmos. These basic doctrines of traditional Chinese medicine are attributed to the heroes of Chinese antiquity, Fu Si, Shang, and Huangdi, the Yellow Emperor. Yet the extant systematic records of these doctrines appears as late as the Han Dynasty, between 206 and 220 AD, in the Huangdi Neijing, the Yellow Emperor's Canon of Maternal Medicine. What is the story of Chinese medicine before the classics, before the definitive formulation of the theory of Chinese medicine, and before Chinese history had yet to be written? A brambling maze of formless mirages confronts the historian of Chinese antiquity. Quote, "You look at it as it is not seen. It is called the formless. You listen to it, and it is not the heart. It is called soundless. You grasp of it, and it is not to be held. It is called the intangible," to quote the Daoism. Where the trail of written records runs dry, the subtle detective must have recourse to anecdotes, myths, and rituals. Investigation of definite impressions then admits of the most formless, intangible, and ineffable thoughts. The history of Chinese thought before detailed written records is perhaps best evidenced in the art and religion through which the spirit of the Chinese came to produce and conceive and know itself. The ancestral spirit of the Chinese people lies in the ancient body and theories of practices that Han Dynasty historian Sima Qian collectively described as Daoism, the doctrine of the way. I propose in this lecture to illustrate how the fundamental doctrines of traditional Chinese medicine flowered from the roots established in ancient Daoism. In ancient China, Daoism was not yet identified parochially with any school, sect, or culture. It was rather conceived of as a unity of integrity and correlation of forces in the natural cosmos. The logic of the cosmos, or cosmology, is the ultimate condition of all theories of medicine that aim to diagnose and treat the nature of the body. Just as the demonstrative knowledge must in general begin from certain axioms to produce necessary conclusions, so must the study of traditional Chinese medicine return to the ultimate logical conditions of its fundamental doctrines in the cosmology of Daoism. Knowledge of traditional Chinese medicine thus consists not merely in the memorization of enumerated doctrines of the classic texts, or even in clinical diagnosis and practice, but principally in tracing the idea of traditional Chinese medicine back to the root of all things, the nameless origin of heaven and earth, which is best understood, but not named, in the eternal Tao. Most East Asian religious practices have their origin in what 19th century historical religion called shamanism. Shamanism was principally meant to denote the practices of the Siberians, and it's observed that East Asian religions that focus upon the potencies and powers of nature, such as Shintoism and ancient Taoism, are genealogically derived from some of the practices and understandings of religious practice that were present in ancient shamanism. Shamanism is thought to have been the oldest religious practice in human history, dating back before the advent of civilization, cities, and agriculture in the Paleolithic era. It's said to have predated all world religions. Shamanism views the universe as an interconnectedness of spirit and matter. Humans lived in the world of matter, along with all of the phenomena in the world, the mountains, trees, the sun, the moon, the plants, the rocks, and so forth, in an interconnected nature and interaction between the two worlds of spirit and matter, in which neither are divided but altogether united in a single idea of the cosmos. Thus, in shamanism, we find the idea of an interconnected natural and supernatural cosmos that will be central to Taoism and its later formation. The shamans, like later Taoist sages, would be the intermediaries between heaven and earth, between the natural and supernatural realms, between the world of men and the world of the spirits. Shamans in this capacity would wear animal skins and feathers, as though they were imitating, in their physical appearances, the natural aspects of the world. At heart, shamanism is an attempt to gain some harmony with and control over the natural forces, not by controlling it as an instrument external to oneself, but rather as being able to work with nature by assisting the physical spirit and world to return to harmony. To quote Martin Palmer, it is the idea of harmony and balance within nature that reflects the harmony and balance of the universe. And this idea is central to both shamanism and Daoism. Chinese culture is thought to have begun in the first three dynasties of Xia, Shang, and Zhou, which are located in the Yellow River Plain in North China. During the Shang dynasty, we have the oldest written records of Chinese religious practices.
It appears that oracle bones had been uncovered since at least the Sui and the Tang dynasties, but it was only in the 19th century that the oracle bones were brought to the attention of the Chancellor of the Imperial Academy in Beijing, Wang Yurong, who immediately noticed that the glyphs that were displayed on the oracle bones appeared very similar to those found in early Zhou dynasty bronzes, and from this he rightly concluded that they must be of very high antiquity, so much so that he immediately began to search for their location, and after many years it was discovered that they had been unearthed in Anyang, which was the traditional capital of the Shang dynasty, which eventually led to the conclusion that these had been produced by the Shang dynasty kings. A special caste of shaman diviners, also called wizards, or wu ren, were employed to crack the bones of the turtle shells in order to divine the wishes and intentions of the spirits. And these shaman diviners or wizards were the immediate descendants of the shamans who had in former times worn the animal skins to intuit the wishes and intentions of nature. The cracking of the oracle bones in the Shang dynasty constituted a continuation of the practice of immersing oneself in nature, of attempting to discern and predict the future potentials and operations of nature through human practices.
It appears that the Shang believed that their ancestors presided over the affairs of their lives and the powers of nature, and that these ancestors could be contacted vis-a-vis the medium of oracular divination, that is, through testing chance events in nature, such as the cracking of shells and bones. Chief of all these ancestors, who were collectively called Di, was Huangdi, who was believed to be the supreme and founding ancestor of the Shang dynasty, and also the primeval ancestor of all the Shang aristocracy. And the king of the Shang dynasty had a unique link to him because he was the direct heir of Huangdi.
The Shang shamanistic rites are practiced in ritual cauldrons, which were the real hearth of the sacrificial cult, and these cauldrons, moreover, were shaped in the image of their religious ideas, namely of the animal motifs and the powers of nature, which characterize shamanistic naturalism.
Chinese art in the Shang dynasty is characterized by a tremendous exuberance of horrific animal motifs. And we see here there's these great big ram heads. The curious thing, however, and I want you to notice this, is how the animal motifs diminish over time. So here is a later bronze vessel from the Shang dynasty. Notice that the ram is still there. This is a similar vessel from the Zhou dynasty. The rams are still there. Take a look at what happens during the Warring States period. Where are the rams now? My hypothesis, and I think this is evidenced in the history of Chinese religious practices, just as it's evidenced in Chinese art, is that throughout the succession of centuries, the Chinese progressively abstracted these animistic motifs that they understood to be powers and potencies in nature, both in their artwork and in their divinatory practices.
Eventually, the imitation of the animal spirits, the wearing of the masks by the diviners, and the imitating of animals through shamanistic practices would disappear as the diviners increasingly abstracted the powers and potencies of nature into an abstract logical code, which would become the I Ching, the standard manual of divinatory logic.
So one of the curious things about Qing divination is that they weren't simply trying to receive messages from the gods, but they were also trying to control the fates of nature. And one of the ways in which they did this was by posing questions with intentional and mutually exclusive terms. So, for instance, they might say that the king wants this or the king wants that, or alternatively that they might pose a question in a way that can only have one answer, in such a way that even though it seems as though the answers are totally determined by chance, that instead the only one possible answer can occur from that.
Shaman diviners were indeed attempting to control the future, not simply to predict it, and through the control of the future also control all of nature, through the spiritual mediums of oracle bones and divination.
Later in the Shang dynasty, some of the later Shang kings were actively divining these practices. So it wasn't something that was practiced by a separate class of scribes, rather it was something that the king himself acted upon as though he was the one determining the fate of nature. The Shang understood that the forces of nature that were outside of their control could be interacted with, could be understood, and for that reason also controlled.
Thus, believing that they could know the future, Shang diviners increasingly came to believe that the sacrifices themselves were dispensable, that they could know the future in the absence of the sacrifices, and that the deity's answers were quite inevitable, so that they could be foreknown in advance through the simple logic of the divination practice itself.